Well, welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. Today we're going to talk about a mix of religious freedom and free speech, and whether or not the government can compel a business owner or even an employee to express messages that contradict their religious beliefs. Our guest today is Matt Sharp. Matt serves as a senior counsel with Alliance Defending Freedom, good friends of ours. And since joining ADF in 2010, he's testified before the United States Congress on the importance of Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and he's also worked extensively on important cases advancing religious freedom and free speech. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on.
You bet, man. It's going to be a fun 30 minutes. This is an important topic, right? And I wanted to start by just talking about, in broad terms, it seems to me that free speech and religious speech are really under attack from a variety of angles, and that there's a struggle of sorts to define what free speech actually means anymore. I mean, I was thinking, we talked a little bit offline, cancel culture, misinformation, censorship. It seems that more and more people are completely comfortable silencing speech that they disagree with. Are you seeing this as something that's on the rise?
Yeah, unfortunately, we see it popping up all over the place. We have not only instances where people are trying to cancel other people, like you said, going after, because I disagree with your view, you shouldn't be allowed to speak it. And that's such a un-American ideology.
Yes.
The right to free speech is something that each of us have. It protects our right to speak messages that are core to our beliefs, core to our values, and that the government especially should never be able to come in and say, you can't speak that. We disagree with this message. We don't like what you're saying, and we're going to shut you down.
Yeah.
And that's why ADF is engaging in more and more of these cases, more and more that we're seeing, whether it's a kid in public school wanting to share their faith. We had a case several years ago. It was a young girl that was just wearing a mask in the midst of all the mask craziness that just says, Jesus loves you. What happened? The school tried to censor it. We see it on college campuses. We see it in the workplace. We see it at school board meetings. This growing sense that if we don't like what you're saying, we need to shut you down, censor you from saying it, and completely run you out of the marketplace.
Yeah. It's amazing to me because we used to talk about the marketplace of ideas, right? And you mentioned education. Boy, I feel like our educational system in this regard has completely collapsed. Like, if you don't have the right ideology, if you don't have the right belief system, in fact, it even pits parents against kids and demonizes parents as domestic terrorists if they disagree with the way the curriculum is going. I mean, we've got quite a problem there. But also, I think another thing that's happening, kind of a byproduct of that, is people are self-censoring. People are literally afraid to talk about what they believe anymore because they do believe there's going to be ramifications for it. Are you seeing that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, there's a saying that we've heard some of the activists that are trying to censor people use. The process is the punishment. So imagine, again, you take a kid in school, you want to speak a message, you want to talk about your faith, you want to talk about your beliefs on an issue. They don't like what you're saying. You're going to get dragged into the principal's office. Your parents are going to get called. It gets dragged before the school board. You think of it in the context of some of our cases. You speak something somebody doesn't like, they file a complaint against you with some civil rights commission. They drag you into before this long investigation, can take weeks, months. Some of these cases drag on for years. And there's a lot of people that will say, man, if the choice is between speaking what I believe or being dragged through that long process of being humiliated in the press, of having people come after me, of the threats that a lot of our clients get, of people calling their homes, calling their businesses and threatening them, for a lot of people, that's a heavy burden to carry. And that's why we're so encouraged and stand with the people that say, you know what, I'm willing to do this. But like you said, that self-censorship is a very real thing that's happening to a lot of people that say, look, if this is the cost of speaking up, maybe I don't want to do it.
Boy, that makes me, I mean, I'm kind of a little bit of a rebel. So like, I kind of like a fight, but I understand why people are deciding, hey, that might not be worth it. I just want to live my life under the Constitution with my God-given rights. I don't want that mess. This is why showing up at a school board and getting put on a list of sorts, which I'm on, I'm sure you're on. No, you're on a different kind of list though, because you're in the fight. People have to count the cost. And we've talked often about, this is the day and age where there will be a cost to standing up for righteousness. There will be a cost for standing up for what you believe. And we're seeing it more and more. Let's shift gears just a little bit because we could talk about that for the next hour. And by the way, we're self-censoring. We've been censored by the social media big boys. And we now, every time we post, we consider, is this going to get us a warning? Is this going to get banned? And I don't like that at all. So we're going through it as well. A lot of our audience will probably have heard of Jack Phillips, right? The Colorado cake artist who was punished by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. And it relates to the case we're going to talk about. But probably most have never heard about Lori Smith of 303 Creative yet, because she's going through a similar fight. Tell us a little bit about Jack Phillips. Tell us a little bit about Masterpiece Cake Shop, and then we'll get into the Lori Smith case.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, Jack Phillips owns Masterpiece Cake Shop in the state of Colorado. And several years ago, he had a gay couple walk into his shop and ask for a custom designed wedding cake to celebrate their same-sex wedding. Now, Jack serves everyone, and he told the couple, look, I can't create this custom cake. I don't create custom works that are inconsistent with my beliefs, but I'm happy to sell you anything in my shop. That's what Jack does for everyone. There's a lot of messages he can't create, but is happy to serve and work with anyone. Well, next thing you know, Jack finds himself being dragged in front of one of these civil rights commissions, investigated, ends up being dragged into court for years, simply standing for his right and the right of all artists like him to be able to speak freely. His case eventually made its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled for Jack, but focused on the hostility that the state of Colorado was showing to him, saying that when Colorado compared Jack's beliefs about marriage to being no different than those from Nazis or others, it showed impermissible hostility because of Jack's religious beliefs. And so they ruled for Jack. His case goes back down. Well, next thing you know, Jack gets sued again. An activist attorney in Colorado comes and says, well, now I want a gender transition cake celebrating the gender transition. And Jack once again said, I can't create that specific message that you're asking me to celebrate. So Jack is still in court. It's actually the third court case now under this Colorado law that's trying to force him to create and celebrate messages that he disagrees with.
Okay, so I live in Colorado. Our headquarters in Colorado. We know all about this stuff. And it is, so I'm thinking to myself as a business owner, how many businesses would be able to survive this type of legal challenge? You're talking about a 6+ year court battle. And this goes back to what you were saying. Like, people are saying, is it worth it? How many businesses can survive that? How has he survived it?
Yeah, it's been difficult. It's had a real impact on Jack's business. Most of all, he's been limited in his ability to create wedding cakes because of the threat that every new customer that comes in could be another potential lawsuit. And so it takes a lot of toll on these business owners. But I think particularly Jack can tell you this, Lori can tell you this, some of our other clients. It's the threats, threats of violence, the hateful calls that they get, cursing them out, doing other things. They can just be really hard. Every morning you go into work and think, am I going to get a call like that today? Am I going to get someone to come in and yell at me? But I think the one bright spot has been the people that have actually encouraged him. In fact, there's been some same-sex couples, some gay individuals that have come into Jack's shop that said, I may disagree with you, but I support your right to speak freely. Because if a government can come and tell you what to say, if Colorado can come and punish you for your beliefs, maybe I'm next. And that's why he is so encouraged when he does see those individuals, including LGBT individuals, speaking out and saying, I stand with Jack. I stand with artists like him because his freedom is my freedom.
Boy, that is the statement of the day, right? Is that, and isn't that, we're trying to get everyone to believe that. Like, hey, if they can do it over this today, they could do it over something else tomorrow. You're not exempt. I mean, this goes back to the days of Hitler, where everyone kind of stood by, well, as long as it's not me. And then eventually you're the only group left and it becomes about you. So we kind of have to care about free speech for all people, religious liberty for all. Let's shift gears a little bit. As you mentioned, the same Colorado agency, the Civil Rights Agency, is now going after Lori Smith. Tell us a little bit about the details of what's going on with her and 303 Creative.
Lori Smith is a graphic artist in Colorado. She designs custom websites, other custom works, and like Jack, serves everyone, people from all walks of life. And she wanted to go into the wedding business. She wanted to be able to design custom websites for couples to celebrate their union. She saw what Jack Phillips had been through. She saw the litigation. She saw the threats of punishment. And she said, really, I have no choice but to challenge Colorado's law, because Colorado is going to punish her the moment she starts doing custom websites. And so Lori filed a lawsuit challenging Colorado's abuse of its state law, just like it had abused it against Jack. She said, I shouldn't have to wait to get punished. I shouldn't have to wait to go through what Jack went through. And so her case has been making its way through the courts. And shockingly, the Court of Appeals, 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, one step below the Supreme Court, said, Lori, what you do is free speech. We completely acknowledge that designing custom websites, the words and images you create are protected by the First Amendment. Nonetheless, we think Colorado can override your right to free speech, can misuse its state law to tell you what you can and cannot say, even when it violates your deepest convictions. And so that's why the Supreme Court took up this case, because we had never seen anything quite this unprecedented, with a court saying your free speech rights, your constitutional rights, these fundamental rights, must bow down to Colorado's misuse of its state law.
Unbelievable. I mean, seriously, like, it's not only are they telling you what you can't say, but now they're telling you what you must say. They're compelling you to violate your values in order to run your business. And I think, and they're putting okay, this is for me. They're putting government over God, right? Because in our Constitution, we have certain God-given, unalienable rights that don't come from government, that come from God, that just are. They're understood. And this law is essentially saying, well, we don't care about those God-given laws. Government's over God now. Is that what they're saying?
Exactly. And you think of what is the role of government? It is supposed to protect these rights. Yes. It's to make sure that Lori, that Jack, that other artists across the country, that all of us aren't censored, aren't bullied into silence, aren't being pressured to self-censor. And yet in Colorado, they're doing the exact opposite. They're saying, Lori, you must speak our message. You must say what we want you to say, or else we're going to punish you, just like we have Jack and just like we will others.
So what arguments is your team going to make? What arguments is the ADF team making before the Supreme Court in her defense? Because that's coming up, right? We're on it.
That's right. The case is going to be argued Monday, December 5th. Our case has been focused on these rights to free speech. There is a long line of cases holding that the government cannot force anyone to speak a message that they disagree with. Whether it was a young Jehovah's Witness child in public school that, because of their beliefs, said, we don't feel comfortable saying the Pledge of Allegiance. And the Supreme Court said, your beliefs, your convictions trump the government trying to force you to say something you disagree with. Wow. So we're building on those cases and asking the Supreme Court to affirm that the First Amendment protects these rights. And so we've talked about some examples. Imagine an LGBT graphic designer and is being asked to create a website criticizing same-sex marriage. Should the First Amendment protect them? Absolutely. Same thing. What if a Democrat graphic artist was asked to design a poster for Republicans? Yeah. Just like the First Amendment ought to protect and does protect both of them, that's what we're asking for Lori, is that same freedom to say, I'll work with anyone, but don't force me to create specific messages that conflict with my beliefs and my values.
It's fantastic. I mean, this seems like common sense. I mean, have we just simply lost our mind on this? I mean, I feel like we've lost our minds, because that is the most common sense argument. If I heard that, I would dismiss this thing in 15 seconds. I mean, this is a piece of cake, right? I know that that's not the way the law works. I used to take law classes. I was considering being an attorney until I realized that the law is really, really hard. You're a lot smarter than me, man. That's all I know. No. I think what's at stake here, there's other legislation right now being voted on. It may have already been voted on, called the Respect for Marriage Act, right? And I think there's some things in there that make religious conviction, make religious speech very vulnerable, right? Because now, if my understanding of the Respect for Marriage Act is correct, it looks like they can go after anyone who doesn't believe in certain types of marriages. And now they can be, their tax exempt status can be affected. Is that going to have an effect on this type of case?
Yeah, I think the so-called Respect for Marriage Act highlights the importance of Lori's case. So under this bill in Congress that just passed the Senate, two big things. Number one is it allows the federal government to be able to go after organizations, individuals, others that hold the belief that marriage is the union between man and one woman. So it's giving the government itself broad new powers. And this could include the IRS looking at tax exempt nonprofit religious organizations and saying, your beliefs about marriage, your belief that same-sex marriage is not consistent with your beliefs, makes you against public policy. And therefore, we can take away your tax exempt status. So number one, we see the government, the U.S. government, is going to have these broad new powers.
Jeez.
But the second thing, and I think this ties very strongly into Lori's case, it gives activist groups like the ACLU a cause of action. It gives them the ability to sue religious organizations, to sue people that believe marriage is the union between one man and one woman. And so when we talk about this issue, there are people that believe in marriage because of religious, but there's also some that say, look, from a sociological standard, society flourishes when you have intact family units, kids being raised with a married mother and father, and we think that's best for society. So regardless of your beliefs about marriage, you ought to recognize that if the government can now punish people because of its belief, if it can use this Respect for Marriage Act to go after people of faith, but also non-religious people and punish them for their speech, that is a terrifying thing. And I think that's why Lori's case takes on this new importance. Hopefully the Supreme Court will affirm that her speech and others like her is protected, and that some of those protections can make sure that the harms that we're worried about with the Respect for Marriage Act are at least mitigated. But I think there's going to be a lot from them. And it just goes to show you this ongoing hostility. This is what we started with. We're going to censor you. We're going to punish you if we don't like your beliefs.
Yeah. It is chilling. I was just talking with Terry Schilling from the American Principles Project, and we talked at length about the strength of the family, that just empirical data evidence shows that an intact marriage between a man and a woman in a relationship with their kids has the most successful outcomes of any other foundational unit. You can't argue it. It's statistically crime, drugs, premarital pregnancies, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think whenever the government, we talked about this, thinks it's above God, that's when we have a problem. Let me ask you this. So we're novices. Most average Americans are sick of these lawsuits that appear to be so clearly decided already by the Supreme Court. Why wasn't the ruling from the Jack Phillips case sufficient to get the Lori Smith case dismissed?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get asked that a lot. In Jack's case, the court was focused on that religious hostility. The fact that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission looked at Jack and said, your belief that marriage is between a man and woman is no different than racist beliefs, than Nazi beliefs, whatever. And so the Supreme Court said the government is supposed to be neutral towards religion. It's not supposed to take sides, and it's not supposed to look at your religious beliefs and say, we find those abhorrent and we're going to punish you for it. And so the Supreme Court just focused on those religious questions, that religious hostility question, and didn't get to what is really sort of the core question in Lori's case. Is the First Amendment protection against the misuse of Colorado's laws? Are artists like Lori and like Jack protected against when these laws are abused and misused? So Lori's case is sort of answering that question. It's specifically focused on that free speech. Can Colorado censor Lori? Can it override her right to free speech and force her to speak messages, to create custom websites celebrating events, celebrating causes that violate her deep convictions?
That's good. Yeah, it is nuanced, right? One case to the next is going to be focusing on different things. And that's why ADF showing up on all of these cases is important, because you're arguing the angles so that we can finally get to a full picture of what we're going to protect and what we're not going to protect. Religious Americans are increasingly concerned about their ability to express their beliefs, especially about the topics we've talked about: marriage, gender, even the basic family unit, for fear of being canceled or being fired from their jobs. That is happening. What would you tell them to do? Because what we're kind of calling on people of God to do is rise up, is to stand up. It's to be bold, to speak with conviction and grace and compassion, of course, but it's to take a stand. We need strength. What would you tell these folks who are concerned about being fired, who are concerned about being canceled, whose businesses are concerned about being run through the mud like this? what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I think a couple things. Number one, I would encourage them to take inspiration from some of the others that are taking these stands. I mentioned Lydia Booth, the young girl in Mississippi that was censored by her school for wearing the Jesus Loves You mask. She stood and she got a great ruling protecting the right of her and other students like them to express their faith. We've got other cases. We had a case in Ohio, Professor Nicholas Merriweather. You brought up the gender issue. He had a student in his class that identified as transgender and was telling the professor, "You must refer to me by my preferred pronoun." And Professor Merriweather said, "I'm going to treat you with respect, and I'm happy to call you by whatever name you choose. But pronouns are a statement of fact. They are you male or are you female? And I'm happy to avoid using them, but I'm not going to use an inaccurate pronoun."
Wow.
Next thing you know, he's getting dragged before the school. He's being punished, threatened with losing his job. But Professor Merriweather stood, and he ended up getting a fantastic ruling from the Court of Appeals saying that the First Amendment protects his right to not be forced to speak something that he disagrees with. Wow. So number one, look at these inspirational cases. Look at others that have stood firm and how their courage to stand resulted in them having a victory. And then second is remember that your taking a stand on this may help others around you. Again, just like with Lydia, just like with Professor Merriweather, because they took a stand, other students in school, other professors and teachers now have stronger First Amendment protections than they did before. And so somebody listening to this, maybe they're facing this threat of censorship, this threat of punishment. I would just ask, perhaps God is preparing you for such a time as this. Maybe you are the Esther that God's saying, I need you to stand right now. I need you to be the one that gets that decisive court victory that not only protects you, but protects others that come after you and their right to free speech.
I got to tell you, that really inspires me. Actually, I've got chills. Like, we don't know. And I think that's why people of faith can operate with a different level of confidence, right? Because we can be assured that if we're being obedient to God, we're doing what God is telling us to do, that even in the midst of that fire, I think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being put into the fire for taking a stand for their faith. We might have to go through that refining fire, but I do believe, and you said it great, is you might get a win that benefits many other people in their ability to express their religious beliefs and their free speech. And I think that alone should be something that compels us to get into the arena. I always say that, I always think to myself, hey, there's more of us than there are of them, and I love the scripture that says, hey, greater is he who's in you than who's in the world. So even if we're outnumbered, because you talk about many examples in scripture where we are outnumbered on the kind of the physical, tangible landscape, but we're not outnumbered with respect to power. A courageous young man or woman in Christ is a majority, and I love that picture. You all have been involved in representing athletes who have done just that, right? These young women who have taken a stand against competing against biological males. Are we having some success there? How's that fight going?
Yeah, I think that's another great example of courage begetting courage.
Yes.
So this started with 4 incredibly talented young women in Connecticut. And the state of Connecticut had adopted a policy saying that a student can compete on teams consistent with their gender identity. And what it meant is that 2 young males began competing in the women's track and field division in Connecticut. And within just a short period of time, captured over 15 championships, over 16 records that they crushed that had previously been held by young women, and over 80 instances where our clients and other young women athletes like them lost an opportunity to advance to the next round of competition or a spot on the podium. And so we're still in the midst of that case. They're challenging that Connecticut policy. But what was encouraging is as their story got out, we started seeing state legislators step up. It started in Idaho, became the first state to pass a Save Women's Sports law, saying that in our state, we are not going to allow men to take spots on a women's team. We're going to protect them from kindergarten all the way to college to make sure that those opportunities are protected. Wow. And now, because of the courageous stand of those 4 young women in Connecticut, 18 states have passed legislation protecting the right of young women to have a fair and level playing field without having to worry about a guy showing up and taking that opportunity away. So sometimes you get a court victory. We're hoping to get that in the Connecticut case, but sometimes the victory comes in other ways where we're seeing these legislators, these states and others standing up to protect fairness in women's sports. And it was all because of the courage of those 4 young high school girls at the time standing up and saying, this is wrong. We're not going to stand for it. We're not going to allow it. We've worked too hard. We've worked up at woke up at 6 a.m. too many mornings to shave a
Yes.
fraction of a second off our time to lose those opportunities to men.
It's amazing. We don't often hear about the wins. Matt, seriously, like I'm thinking to myself, gosh, if we could promote this kind of success over and over again, I think it would embolden. And that's part of the reason why I wanted you on today, is because we do want to promote the wins. You know, we've got this segment that we send out to our supporters all the time: freedom wins, freedom wins. You know, what areas are we winning? And I remember having a couple weeks where I was talking with a couple of the guys that I work with, and I'm like, hey, did we get any wins this week? You know, and we're kind of scratching our head and we're digging deep to see if we have wins. You just listed 4 or 5 wins. And the win isn't always the case that you're dealing with. It could be the effect, that broader legislative effect that comes from it. I'm really encouraged by the work that you're doing, by the work that the ADF team is doing. And we're going to keep promoting the wins. You know, we're going to keep promoting the wins and encouraging people to take a stand. One of the things that I heard from these young ladies was they were afraid to take a stand. But once they took the stand, they were overwhelmed with the amount of support that they received. Is that what you're experiencing?
Oh, absolutely. Both from their own teammates, who a lot of them had the same frustration of losing a spot on the team to a guy or losing out on a championship to a guy. They got so much encouragement from their local teammates, from others. But what was really neat to see is this sort of national movement built around them. And this was a movement of very diverse groups. I mean, you've got organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom, Concerned Women for America, others that are more, conservative, religious. But then we also had radical feminist groups, women groups that are on the other side of the political spectrum saying, hey, we stand with you. We fought hard for these equal opportunities for women. We fought hard for Title IX and the ability to have women's sports teams. And now here's guys trying to come along and take that away. So we end up with these great coalitions of people, very diverse people, very diverse religions, ideologies, and backgrounds, but are all united. And it's been so encouraging to our clients in Connecticut to see the support, even some professional athletes and others that have started speaking out, taking up the cause and saying, what happened to these young women is wrong. We're not going to stand for it. We're not going to allow it. We have to preserve the integrity of women's sports.
It's amazing. I think that's a picture of what America was really designed to be, right? That we've designed this system with certain values, certain rights that come from God that we can all agree to. You know, we talk about culture a lot of times and how we're a melting pot. Very true. However, there are these core values, these core beliefs, these core natural given rights that we should all be able to rally around, regardless of the differences that we might have in beliefs, regardless of the differences that we might have in ideology. That's okay, because what makes America unique is the adherence to these core set of values. And that's what you're talking about. You just mentioned organizations that would never be on the same side of the ball, but they're on the same side of the ball for these issues. Does that encourage you?
Absolutely, it does. And we're seeing that not only in the women's sports, but going back to Lori Smith's and Jack's cases. In both situations, we saw people from the other side of the ideological spectrum speak out in support, submit briefs in support to the Supreme Court saying, we have different views about marriage. We may not agree with Lori and Jack, but we support their right to free speech, because they recognize that a same government that can punish Lori Smith, that can punish Jack Phillips, that can take away opportunities from these young women in Connecticut, can do the same to them, can punish their speech, can punish their beliefs. And that's why, just like you said, a win for Lori in this case is going to be a win for every American, for every one of our right to speak freely, to not fear government censorship or coercion or punishment just because the government disagrees with us.
That's fantastic. All right. So as we close, is there one thing that you would encourage, not only, I guess, business owners, right, because they're under attack, but also private citizens who want to take a stand, including these young athletes? Is there one thing that you would tell us to do, to encourage us in some way to jump into this fight? What would you tell us?
Yeah, I think 2 quick things. Number one, as I would say, is be willing to stand for this issue. Be willing to be the one that maybe it is going to be uncomfortable. Maybe you are going to have some pressure on your business or in your personal life. But just taking a stand on this issue can have huge benefits and repercussions for yourself and for others that can really help to create a culture of free speech across our country. But secondly, maybe this is more important, is speak. This goes back to our first point. So many people are afraid to speak up. And I just tell people, just speak.
Yeah.
Share your viewpoints, create custom works of art, use pixels and paint and baked goods and flowers and whatever to just speak and share your beliefs, because that is the fundamental right that we're doing, is the right for all of us to speak freely, to live out our faith. And so I just encourage people, have the boldness to speak out what you believe, to not be bullied or pressured or censored by anyone to silence yourself, but to speak freely and boldly of what your convictions are.
Wow. Well, that is a great way to wrap up this segment. Matt, I got to tell you, we're going to be praying for you and all of your teammates, all of your attorneys across the country with Alliance Defending Freedom and with other organizations that are doing the same thing. We're praying for you because we need these victories. These are important, not only for us, but for the generations to come. Matt, thank you so much for being on the program today. You've been an awesome guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're the best, my friend.